Hello, everyone. This is Lou Weiss from Manufacturing Talk Radio, and my buddy Harry Moser from Manufacturing Initiative. There he is. And we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff today regarding import and export and dependence and who's who's winning and who's losing in this war that we're all involved with. So, Harry, welcome aboard.
Great to be back. We're doing this once a month, and it's one of the best things I do every month. I'm happy to be here with you, Lou.
Oh, that's great. I'll pay you extra for that.
No, you should say you'll pay me twice as much. Extra would cost you at least a penny.
And, well, twice as much. You get what you pay for. All right, Harry, our folks are waiting to listen to what's going on in the world, just the way you see it.
Yeah. So, to me, the most interesting thing continues to be the risk of decoupling with China. The risk that China, either voluntarily because they're mad at us, or involuntarily because they've attacked Taiwan and there's a war going on over there, that U.S. companies are going to be cut off with everything from China, everything probably from Taiwan, maybe everything from Southeast Asia. And this could be existential. This could be end of life for many companies if they and their suppliers cannot get the Chinese, Taiwanese, et cetera, products. So I saw. I'm collecting any information on the likelihood of that happening because I don't want to be a doomsayer, but it's a real possibility. I picked up an article 2 days ago with one of our top military guys saying the Chinese are getting ready to invade by 2027. 2027. They want to be ready by 2027. Well, that's 5 years from now. So if you're a company that is dependent on China, and it could happen anytime, you ought to be working really hard to be less import dependent, to bring more of the work back to the country.
Well, I just recently ran across a Chinese American journalist by the name of Jordan G. Chang.com. And he has his nose to the grindstone with regards to China like you can't believe. And it's unbelievable. If you really want to know what's going on behind the scenes over in China, go to GordonGChang.com. I don't know if you know him, but you ought to look into him.
I'll take a look.
So they're rattling the swords, they're rattling the battle drums. Are you really fearful that this could happen, even though we owe them so much money?
Yes, I am, because they seem dominant on restoring the empire and being the world dominant power. We've had the advantage of being the world dominant power, but we're generally a benign power, and I'm not sure they would be. And so the only data that I have so far, I may have mentioned last month, was a survey that was done in Taiwan. They asked the populace, what's the probability of war, Taiwan and China, and 7% said highly probable, and 21% said fairly probable, and then lesser amounts. But 7%, 21% chance of war, and all the commerce between us and China and Taiwan stop, and maybe the Taiwanese have said, if they think they're going to lose that war, they're going to blow up all the semiconductor plants because they don't want China to get them. The economy all worldwide would be a disaster.
Well, you would think that we and others would have this smart enough leaders and thought providers and so on that, mutually assisted destruction is an
Yeah.
absurdity. And how could they even think about it?
Well, China believes that it's restoring a a runaway province. Just like if we lost Florida, if Florida seceded, and then we said we're going to take Florida back, that's part of our country, and then Mexico said no, we're not going to let you take Florida back. Well, we'd be mad. So I can
Yeah,
understand. Yeah, I can understand why they're mad, but but on the other hand, we have been the one that has enabled their growth, their economic improvement, all the money that pays for their military and R&D and their espionage and so on. So we've suffered because to allow them to get that middle class status, and I certainly don't want to be subservient to them, and because we're not trying to dominate them, so we don't want them to get strong enough to dominate us. So I'm not. Hopefully, the people behind both countries say, yeah, we're going to work this out, and it's going to be okay. But until it happens, companies ought to be prepared for the eventuality and ought to be reshoring everything they can.
I'd give them Florida.
You give them Florida,
Yeah, I don't like Florida.
including my condo.
Oh, now, oops, oops. So let me ask you something. Being that we're talking China, U.S. economy, and so on, how big is our deficit presently between China and the U.S.? I mean, how real is their antics about going after us when we owe them money? How much do we owe them?
I'm not worried. I think they probably hold 500 billion or $1 trillion worth of our debt, a lot of our debt.
That's not a
Um,
lot.
it's a pretty lot.
Uh, uh,
Yeah,
I mean, it's real money.
yeah. Well, every once in a while they threaten to um, sell it, and because the implication is that it would drive down the dollar, because
Right.
they're buying it drove up the dollar, so they're selling it would drive down the dollar. And I say, go to it, knock yourself out, because if they sell it and the dollar goes down and the Chinese currency goes up, then their product won't be so cheap anymore, and we won't have such a big trade deficit with them. So I'd love to have them. I don't want them to sell $1 trillion in one day, but
No.
and they don't want to either because they're not going to get value for it. But if they spread it out over a year or 2 years, announce they're going to do it, I think it'd be great for the United States for them to do so. And I'm sure you'd be willing to buy some of those bonds and
Oh,
keep the U.S.
sure.
afloat.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So
I'll put up
this
with
is
you.
almost like a no-win world scenario.
Yeah. So you
Nobody
asked,
can win.
yes, about our trade deficit. Overall, in 2021, it was 1.1 trillion. So 1.1 with trillion with a T dollars. Our imports were that much larger than our exports, record level. And with China, I can't remember exactly, but I think our imports from China are 500 billion roughly a year with a B, and our trade deficit with China is 300 or 350 billion. So the imports are a fifth of our imports. The trade deficit is a third of our total trade deficit. But
Right.
the other interesting thing on this trade deficit subject is that the Chinese trade surplus with the U.S., so roughly 300 billion, $400 billion, many years is about the same as their trade surplus with the world. So another way of putting that is that China has roughly trade balance with all the other countries and a huge trade surplus with the United States. So I believe that they have intentionally made a policy, told their companies, sell into the US, undercut the US economy, undercut US manufacturing, which will weaken their budget, weaken their military, weaken their resolve, and so that if eventually it comes to some kind of a conflict, they'll be softened up for what happened. So like they allow themselves to have trade deficits with Germany and maybe Japan and South Korea and all these places, but with us, huge trade surpluses.
It's interesting. And unfortunately, I don't remember the name of the author, but there was a book written by a former CIA intelligence officer The name of the book is The 100-Year Marathon, and it talks about what China has been planning and putting, effectuating it and putting it into the process of their strategy for the last 60, 70 years going forward for another 30, 40 years.
Yep.
I read the book when I was up at Cape Cod, lying on a beach, resting and relaxing, and I was freaking out. I
Hmm.
was freaking out. It's scary. They know what they're doing. They're smart people, and we may not have as smart a people right now.
Yeah. Well, they're very disciplined.
Very.
They've taken the long-term approach. The people work hard. The government the government does, they don't seem to have to do what's popular. They do what's necessary to achieve their objectives. That's a
Right.
nice way to be. Whereas here, all the politicians, almost all the politicians, are doing whatever it takes to get reelected.
Some successfully, some not. That's the big political game here in this country, and that's the next election. So that's, in my opinion, a unfortunate situation.
No,
So, in regards to China, and China does build actually a lot of materials and parts for us for our own defense industry. How's that going to work out?
yeah, I don't think we get many components for defense. We get a fair number for aviation.
Okay.
Okay, commercial aviation like Boeing.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's parts, I don't think there's intentionally parts of the F-35 or the nuclear submarines coming out of China.
What
But
about the electronics and the sensors and transistors and so
yeah, I do hear stories once in a while about counterfeit and altered parts that military contractors obtain to save money or because they can't get the original thing, and that those parts may have been altered by China, may have. I mean, I worry they've got some software in them that when they when they send a signal out, all of our planes will fall out of the
on?
sky. So
Yeah.
we're stupid. I mean, if I were the Pentagon and I found that Raytheon was buying stuff like that that came out of China, the penalties would be immense.
Oh, absolutely. And, so much for cybersecurity, buying from our adversaries.
Yeah, stupid.
Does that have something to do with keep your enemies closer?
Yeah. No, that's not a good idea.
Harry, you got some charts and graphs for our audience regarding trade balances and sourcing offshore. Why don't you give us a little insight into that?
Okay.
Pictures are always worth a bazillion words.
Okay. Did that come up?
Uh, Now it did, yes.
Okay. This just to put things in perspective on the trade. The blue chart, the blue bar is our imports, and but if you adjust that uh, for the fact that the U.S. pricing is maybe 20-30% higher than the imports, you go from 2.5 trillion a year to about three and a quarter trillion at U.S. price levels. And if you compare that to U.S. manufacturing production, 2.5 trillion, you can see that we're importing 20% or so more than we're producing.
All right.
So it's we're not self-sufficient. We're significantly dependent on imports, and especially and most at risk from China. But why don't I just go through all the slides now,
Sure,
and
go
then
ahead.
we won't have to bring them up again. I think that'll work pretty
No
well.
problem.
So here's another chart that Jack Kerr did for me. Jack's a real good guy, an Excel expert. He focuses on doing things for manufacturing companies, and he took different categories of products, uh, and you can see the names of the categories there in the bottom of the chart, and the red shows for that category how much we import, and the green shows how much we export. And you can see there's a lot more red than green. That's the trade deficit. But but we already knew that. The more interesting thing is that when you look and say, where do we have trade surpluses? So where is the green bigger than the red? Well, there's a couple that are okay, like aircraft. We know we're pretty good. Used to be pretty good with Boeing at least. And but other than that, we have trade surpluses primarily in agricultural commodities, corn, soybeans, things like that, oil. We now have trade surpluses. And then you say, well, where do we have trade deficits? Well, significantly in high-tech manufactured products. So motor cars, cell phones, computers, medical things, so things, televisions, gas turbines. So all kinds of the high-tech things, we tend to have trade deficits, and the tech, the thing that we have a trade base or trade balance here, or a trade mix that's more like what you'd expect from a developing country, from some African country that that it doesn't have much in the way of manufacturing, doesn't have much technology, but has a lot of commodities to sell,
Right.
and yet we're supposed to be the arsenal of democracy. So this, when you look at this and think about where the pluses and the minuses are, it's a weak place to be. And back after World War II, it didn't look like this. We were strong across the board. Next, talking about the trade deficit, this chart shows the trade balance. So the exports minus the imports as a percentage of the GDP, because the GDP grows, prices change, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see it's overall it's gotten worse. Bigger negatives means imports more than exports, but at least the last 10 years, it's flattened out. It's got improved a little bit. It's not quite as bad. It stayed about flat, and that's primarily because we're not offshoring as much. So you used to be, 10, 15, 20 years ago, you'd be reading every day about another factory shutting down and people moving off to China, India, Mexico, somewhere, moving their work out. And you don't hear that very much anymore. So the rate of offshoring, the rate of losing the work has dropped, and the rate of bringing it back, the rate of reshoring has improved dramatically. So as I mentioned before, in 2010 we knew of 6,000 jobs reshored in that year, and last year was 260,000 in the year. Looks like 350,000 this year. So we're losing less, we're bringing back more, and therefore at least we're stable on the trade front, but not. But I want to get that back up to neutral, so our imports equal our exports. Then the last slide I had, you mentioned the defense industry having to buy things from offshore. They put out a report every year, and there's 2 or 3 versions of it. This is one that I found, and they itemize the materials, the products, the services, software, what have you, that they cannot find in the country, and they have to source offshore, and some that they have to source from adversaries, from China, from Russia, from places like that, like rare earth minerals is a classic example, and so they believe it's not a viable long-term condition, and I agree with them 100%, and I agree with you.
Yeah, wow, that's good. I appreciate that. One of the things that just to bring it to the forefront, the fact that foreign countries have been able to produce goods and services for us either better than or more efficient or more cheaper or whatever, really started during uh, the Clinton era, when he came up with the globalization of America. And that's what we started making relationships overseas. And, we're going to buy this from you, we're going to buy that from you. And even in some cases, we invested in those countries to be able to make stuff for us. And then we just stopped making them. So now we have to buy from them, puts us in this dark place where we can't get all of the goods that we used to make. you know, we don't need horseshoes anymore, but we do need lots of forgings. Uh, the part, this all started in the 1990s.
Well, I think even before, I
Okay.
agree with what you said, but what I see is happening maybe since the Second World War.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah, and the is that the U.S. wanted to be the good, wanted to help the world become everything it could be, wanted to be the champion of democracy, and they'd find some poor struggling country and say, and the country would say, hey, you want us to go your way instead of the Russians' way, you gotta help us. So we'd give them money, we'd open our market to them, help them develop an industry at the expense of our own industry, because we give them the most favored nation status with no duties on the product, because that helped them get middle class,
Right.
get democracy, get what, and that all that's good. But and if you did that once, it would be okay. But if you do it 100 times, then you've knocked out 100 industries in the United States, and that's why we have all the supply chain gaps. And when we were so strong after World War II, maybe it was the right thing to do. But 20 years ago, 30, we should have stopped it. No more special deals. Go back, take a lot of those old deals, change them, charge them as much for duty as they charge us. You know,
Right.
equal handed, because Mama just isn't rich anymore.
The part that bothers me about all this tariff stuff is that uh, the tariffs in this country on foreign goods, particularly out of China, is not paid to the U.S. from China. It's paid from the importers in the U.S. that pay the U.S. government the tariff.
That's
So,
correct.
you know, so why don't we have quotas? Why don't we create something that puts the burden on the foreign country? In this case, we're talking, I think, mostly about China,
Yep.
instead of putting the problem on the American manufacturer, the American consumer, and now inflation is at 9.1
Yeah.
and may go higher. We may wind up seeing a recession, maybe. Um, we did this.
Yeah. Although, let me say, functionally, I don't think it makes much difference. I think if right now the U.S. importer pays the duty, and if you're buying something for 100 and you pay 5% duty, that's 105, and then you sell it. Okay. Whereas if instead if China had to pay the duty and sold it to the U.S. importer for 105, the U.S. importer would be in exactly the same economic condition. So I don't think it's a question of
Well,
who pays it. To me, the question is our average duty on China is about 2%, on excluding the Section 301 tariffs. Our average duty on China is about 2%, and they have regular duties of that probably average 4 or 5% on us. And in addition, they have a value added tax of 14%. So their stuff coming here, we hit with maybe 2, and our stuff going there gets hit with 19.
I guess the point that I'm looking at, being a steel producer myself in my real life, when I'm not wearing the yellow jacket, the real tariff is around 30%. So it's not 5% as a small number, it's 30% that our companies, our steel companies, have to shell out.
You're talking because of the steel and aluminum tariffs that Trump put
That's
in.
correct.
Yeah, I was going back to just the basic tariffs prior to Trump.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree. There's a lot of stuff prior to Trump, but we don't talk politics here.
Okay,
So,
prior to 2016.
right. So, what else are you looking at in regards to uh, the situation that we're all existing in right now? Um,
Well,
let's talk.
one of the things
Good.
that's hot right now is this CHIPS Act.
Yeah,
You've read about the CHIPS Act, which is which is just passing. It's been struggling for a year to get it passed, and it was held up because the Democrats and Republicans couldn't agree. The Democrats had added in a bunch of unrelated items that they wanted to get passed, and the Republicans said no, and eventually a lot of that got pulled out, and so it's now primarily just a chips thing, which is going to come up with something like $54 billion, most of which will go to subsidize chip foundries, some of which is for R&D and universities. And this is a feeding frenzy on all the money that's going to be put out for everybody. And overall, I think that's a good thing. And it looks like it's going to pass,
Yes.
maybe this week, total pass, and then Biden will sign it, and it'll be going. And it's the right thing to do. And chips are just too important for technology not to do it. But as I think I mentioned last time, the if you just build dozens of chip foundries here and we make massive amounts of chips, I'm sure there's going to be excess chip capacity in the future because every country now, every big country is building chip
And
foundries.
and not too far into the future either.
Yeah, it could be in 6 months, but certainly in 5 years when these plants are all built, there's
Yeah.
going to be some of them are going to go bankrupt, I think.
Well,
And
not only that, but the chips that they're making today they have like 200,000 transistors on a
yeah,
chip.
yeah,
So you don't even need as many
as
chips
many, yeah.
as before.
But
Uh,
there is increasing need for them in the EVs and
Absolutely.
electric pencil sharpeners, and things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the point I wanted to make is my fear is that there'll be too much capacity, prices will come way down. Our chips, it's generally agreed, our manufacturing cost of the chips is going to be 20-30% higher than other countries, than China, Taiwan, labor rates, et cetera. And then we will not, since we do not assemble very much in the way of electronic product, we don't make servers, we don't make cell phones, we don't make electronic medical devices to speak of. All these 5G systems, et cetera, we're going to have to get China to buy our expensive chips to produce all that electronic stuff and ship it back to us. And that's not a good system either. Right?
Yeah.
So we say that if you're going to subsidize all the chip foundries, then we should level the playing field, get the dollar down, have the skilled workforce we need, and make it so companies decide to make the infotainment systems and the electronic medical devices and the servers here, and therefore there'll be a local market for the chips.
Is it not occurring now where chip manufacturers are beginning to be built here in the US?
Well, the foundries are being built here,
Yeah.
yes, but the assembly of the chips into printed circuit boards and into servers and into fancy electronic systems for
Yeah.
medical still isn't happening here, especially. I mean, it's happening, but not as fast as I'd like.
Right. Right.
Although I did see that the IPC, which is the printed circuit board, like association, they're appealing to the government to subsidize the production of printed circuit boards here in the country. So everybody's
Of
going to
course
want to
they
do
are.
that. Yeah.
Of course they are.
And we say you can't afford to subsidize everybody. Instead, you should change. Instead of helping everybody push their way up the hill, you should build a path around the hill so they can all get along on their own. That's my
Interesting thought.
yeah.
What kind of political party do we need to make all that happen?
We'll work on that. So
Oh,
another thing I wanted to get in, we talked a bit about the critical materials. What are the critical materials that we need? And it's obvious that chips and computers and rare earth minerals and things like that are important. But you also need a broad range of goods to support the critical materials. So you go back to World War II, and we converted auto factories to make tanks. And you can never have enough tank factories. You have to have other factories that you can convert and machine tools that you can use to make the things that you want to make during the war. And so as an example, my dad, his whole career worked at Singer Sewing Machine in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And during the Second World War, he was there making bomb sites to make bombing more accurate. Okay, and they used the machines, the heat treating, the everything else there at the Singer factory to be able to produce that. So if you don't have this broad range of manufacturing capability, when you need to start making all high volumes of all kinds of stuff that you need for the conflict, or because you can't get product out of the other country, you're screwed. And so we believe it's necessary to have that broad range of industrial competence.
It's called Protect Us Thy Asses into the Future.
Okay.
We do need to protect ourselves, and we need to make sure that we've got resources and that we have food and we have all the things that we need, that we seemingly right now, as a result of COVID, the war in Ukraine and so on, that we're really negatively being impacted on all the things that you just spoke of.
No.
So, Harry, it's always a pleasure. Any parting words for us for our final moments?
Yeah, I like to say that there's certainly a risk of being so dependent as we are, and short term, everybody has experienced the supply chain disruptions due to COVID, dock strikes, all that kind of thing. But longer term, it's this major risk of decoupling with China or the Russia if that got worse and more of Europe became not available, and so people, let's say businesses, manufacturers, branded product have to think about that long-term risk exposure and take the actions that will get them safe, get them to have a reliable future.
Harry, well said, and it's a pleasure as every month. And I thank you for your intent, your insight, and your intellectual grasp of what's going on. That everyone should take heed. We are all in some level of trouble. I don't want to overstate that, but keep watching as to what's going on in the world. Harry,
see everybody here again in a month. Look forward to it. Lou, always a pleasure.
And everyone, I just want to make sure that you're aware that we are on every Tuesday, but we're on demand. We've got 700 shows on our platform. We've got 300 videos, including Harry. So take a listen. We're all about manufacturing, domestic, international, technology, oil, gas, whatever the meal of the day is, we got it. So thank you very much, Harry. Thank you for everyone listening. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.